A week later, though, when I went to our weekly Sunday dinner, I was expecting my family to make fun of me for my announcement. But when I showed up, well, I was not expecting what happened next. For starters, there were several police officers at the house waiting for me. Hey, what's going on?
You have a lot of nerve showing your face here after what you've done.
What are you talking about? What do you mean? Oh, just stop playing dumb. Officers, this is the man that stole my money. Arrest him. Before I could say another word, the police tackled me to the ground and handcuffed me and marched me away. I didn't know what was going on until I was thrown into a jail cell. I was later told that I was being charged with stealing my father's money. He had apparently kept the inheritance from my uncle in his safe in his office at home, and it had been stolen. I knew that I was innocent, but my family instantly suspected me and charged me with the crime. Hi there, my name is Liam, and I wonder if anyone out there can relate to what I have lived through. It has been quite a wild ride, and at the end of the day, I really wonder if there was ever anything I could have done differently. Let me start off by saying that I haven't always been the best person. In fact, as a kid, I was kind of a terror. My parents would constantly have to keep an eye on me and make sure that I wasn't getting into trouble, whereas my older brother Joey and younger sister Sarah, they were absolute angels.
Liam, your brother and sister told me that you stole candy. Is this true? Yes, Daddy, he did.
Shut up, you snitch.
Forget him. Liam, did you steal candy?
Yes, Father.
Liam, you are grounded. Now get over here and receive your spanking as well.
I really don't know why I kept acting out. I mean, the spankings were awful, and on more than one occasion my parents even would slap me as well. Honestly, it wasn't until high school when I finally snapped out of being a rotten kid. I was being stupid, and I took my parents' car for a joyride and crashed it. As a result, my parents put me into one of those scared straight programs where convicts in prison yell at kids and tell them their life stories, so that the kids learn the hard lessons and don't become like them. It was terrifying, and after that, I had indeed learned my lesson, and I changed my life around. I got a part-time job, and I paid my parents back for wrecking their car. I even kept the job after I did, and started to save up for school later on, as I wanted to make something of myself. However, my parents never stopped seeing me as just some delinquent. Looking back though, I think one of the reasons that I acted out so much was because it got me attention. When my parents weren't yelling at me, they pretty much ignored me. Like I said, my brother and sister were such great kids from the word go. They tended to get better grades than me, but my parents also always praised them for whatever they were doing. Joey joined the track and field team, and my parents couldn't stop telling him how amazing he was. Seeing this, I then joined the school wrestling team, and my parents couldn't have cared less. Even when my team was in the championships for all the schools in the state, they still couldn't be bothered to go to one of my matches. And when I came home with a trophy, they barely even looked at it. Instead, they told me to keep it in my room while they placed Joey's medals and trophies on the fireplace mantle, where anyone that would visit the house could see them. At any rate, once I started on the path of the straight and narrow, I pretty much gave up on trying to impress my parents. I knew that they would only ever see me as just a thug, and I figured that the only way I could ever show them that they were wrong would be to get a good paying job and show that I could make it on my own in the world as a productive member of society. I even started volunteering for elections, and I began getting to know some of the prominent members of our city, but none of that made any difference at all. Hey, Mom and Dad, I met the mayor yesterday. He's a really great guy, and he gave me some great financial advice.
Oh, is that so? Were you just planning on robbing him? You know that robbing such a prominent member would not look good on the family.
Rob him? No, I would never do that.
Just like you would never steal a car or candy?
That was years ago. I've changed since then.
A tiger never changes its stripes.
They just couldn't see me as anything but a criminal in spite of the fact that I hadn't broken the law in several years. They didn't care though. No matter what I did, my siblings were always seen as being better. If I got good grades, somehow theirs were more impressive. If I got a raise at work, it didn't matter because my parents were convinced that I would just lose the job eventually, because it was only a matter of time before I stole from them. What was worse was that by the time I graduated from college where I took political science, I was working full-time for a candidate that was trying to become a governor, and that was seen as less of a job than the part-time jobs of my sister and brother who were working for a grocery store. It was incredibly annoying, but the real problems didn't occur until after my siblings and I all moved out. We all lived close to home though, and even though it was a huge pain in the butt for me. We all went home on Sundays for dinner. It was a pain as that was when my family would roast me. They would call me all kinds of names and ask if I had managed to not break the law that past week. All I could do was roll my eyes. But then, one Sunday, our father had some bad news for us.
So I have some bad news. Your Uncle Sebastian, who lived across the country, passed away. He was very ill, and he lost his battle with his illness. However, he left me a significant amount of money. That's tragic, Dad. What will you do with the inheritance? Your mother and I haven't decided yet, but we figured that we would just hold on to it until we could figure something out. I know that you were all close to him. Just know that he is no longer suffering.
It was actually a pretty big blow to us. Of all our aunts and uncles, Uncle Sebastian was the most fun. He was one of the few adults I knew that didn't treat me like a criminal, and he had told me more than once that if I put forth the effort that I could make something of myself someday. I was actually kind of surprised that he hadn't left any money to my siblings and I, and had given it all to our father, but honestly, it didn't bother me that much. It was only money, and I wasn't hurting for cash. In fact, I had recently gotten a raise at the firm I was working for as a consultant. That night when I went home, I made the choice to try to make my uncle proud. He had told me that I could be something if I set my mind to it, and so I announced that I would be running for mayor. It wouldn't be cheap, but I had saved up some money from my job, and I knew that I could use my connections to get some donations that would help. A week later, though, when I went to our weekly Sunday dinner, I was expecting my family to make fun of me for my announcement, but when I showed up, well, I was not expecting what happened next. For starters, there were several police officers at the house waiting for me. Hey, what's going on?
You have a lot of nerve showing your face here after what you've done.
What are you talking about? What do you mean?
Oh, just stop playing dumb. Officers, this is the man that stole my money. Arrest him.
Before I could say another word, the police tackled me to the ground and handcuffed me and marched me away. I didn't know what was going on until I was thrown into a jail cell. I was later told that I was being charged with stealing my father's money. He had apparently kept the inheritance from my uncle in his safe in his office at home, and it had been stolen. I knew that I was innocent, but my family instantly suspected me and charged me with the crime. I kept telling the police I was innocent, but they told me that until they were finished with their investigation, that I would have to stay in jail. Hearing this, I knew that I needed to call in a favor, or else I could very well be stuck in jail for weeks, which would seriously hurt my campaign. In fact, my campaign was what made my family suspect me of stealing the money. They were convinced I stole it and used it to jumpstart my political career. Angry, I called a lawyer friend of mine and begged him to help me. Luckily, he was a true friend, and he did some looking into things and even hired a private investigator to follow the members of my family. He suggested that maybe someone in my family had taken the money and that they had used me to take the blame so that they could get away with it. Sadly, I was in jail for a full week before my friend finally showed up at the jail, and shortly after, he did. I was released. I was shocked and unsure what had changed. Thanks for bailing me out.
Oh, I didn't bail you out. I proved that you were innocent.
But how?
Well, it cost me a bit because I hired a few private investigators, but it was worth it. They gathered proof that your campaign was funded completely through legal channels and that you didn't steal the money from your father's safe. That was step one.
And what was step two?
They found who actually stole the money.
Just as he was talking, my brother and sister were marched into the jail in handcuffs and were thrown into a cell. Once the handcuffs were off of them, they attacked each other and began slapping and scratching one another until the officers separated them and threw them in different cells. Apparently, the private investigators noticed that my siblings were drowning in debt, but recently suddenly had a lot of money that they paid off their debts with, and then began to splurge on buying a lot of luxury items. Joey bought himself a new car, while Sarah bought all sorts of jewelry. I knew that I was innocent, but I had no idea that my siblings would end up being the actual criminals. I couldn't help but laugh at them, which only made them even angrier. It appeared that they both assumed that the other had ratted them out, and that they hadn't figured out that it was their own stupidity that had gotten them caught. The real tragedy was that once my parents showed up, they kept telling the police that I was the real criminal and that my siblings were innocent. The police, of course, tried to show them the evidence that said otherwise, but they just refused to listen. Just as always, all I could do was shake my head and just leave them to their delusions. After all, I had work to do, and I wasn't going to let them ruin my future. Months later, both Joey and Sarah were sentenced to over 3 years in prison each. My parents tried to spin things and say that the money they stole was just a gift, but the police had too much evidence to show that it had been theft. However, that wasn't the end of my family's problems. As it turned out, my uncle had indeed left money to Joey, Sarah, and myself, but our father had kept it all for himself. That landed him in legal trouble as well. Since he had gone against what was dictated in the will, he was charged with a misdemeanor and ended up going to prison for a couple years as well. My mother was the only one that walked away mostly scot-free, but with my father and siblings gone, she struggled to keep the house and ended up having to sell it to pay for my father's legal fees. In the end, after my father got out of prison, the two of them ended up renting a small little one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't much, but it was all they could afford. As for me, after my father was convicted, he was forced to give me my share of the inheritance, which greatly helped me with my campaign. I had been so worried that my family drama would make people hesitant to vote for me, but it only ended up humanizing me and making people like me even more. It was such a boost that I ended up winning the race in a landslide, and I am happy to say that I am now the mayor. It really hasn't been an easy journey to get here, and I often wonder if maybe I had cleaned up my act earlier, if it would have changed anything with my parents and siblings, or if they were always destined to be the people that they became. But at any rate, I won't let that affect my future. And who knows, after I finish my term as mayor, maybe I'll set my political sights on something a bit higher like president. Do you think I would make a good president?